Now, we will move on to the next session here, where we have uh, my colleague Bala, who will take on the next session from here on. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thanks, Siva. Fantastic session and conversation. I personally learned a lot as well. I'm very sure the audience learned as well. So moving on to today is a double delight day. We have two sessions. We have another fantastic speaker, Shilpa Sharma. She's a co-founder of Jaipur and Mustard, and also a founder of Breakaway. Jaipur is an online commerce website for handcrafted products, very eclectic selections. And Mustard is a chain of restaurants, and Breakaway is a experiential tourism platform for offbeat and learning-oriented curated travel experiences. So the interesting part, which I have a lot of questions for Shilpa in this session, is around she's spanned across three different categories, from fashion and home decor to restaurants and food and area, and then to travel as well. It's such a varied experience, and it'll be very fun to have her speak to us about her experience here as well. So let me welcome Shilpa to the session. Shilpa, hello, welcome.
Hi. Thank you very much to Nice Arohana for having me. And, I'm very happy to be here and to be sharing some of my experiences.
Got it. Sounds good. Thank you, Shilpa, for joining us there. As I was mentioning in the introduction, I was very intrigued with your experience, which spans across very different categories, and people do spend a full career in one category. You have done three, so kudos to you. And we just wanted to kick it off by understanding your journey. I mean, how did you start? How did you go from how did you go from your first experience to the next one, and what set it off for you?
Okay. So I was always wanting my career. It was I went straight from campus into sales and marketing, and at that point in time it was more about planning marriage. I came from a family which didn't really take too kindly to women wanting to go out and work. So started career advertising, figured very quickly advertising was not really my cup of tea. Moved to brand and spent about 6 years in marketing between Cadbury and Co. And whilst it was great to be part of these large MNC cultures and process-driven organizations, it was a tremendous amount of learning. The truth is that my heart was not really in it. I think there's an opportunity that came up when Fab India was looking to expand its geographical footprint, and they decided to come to Bombay. And I think for me it was just love of the brand, love of product, and just the need to be in the middle of all that gorgeous stuff that made me just drop my job at Marico, and I took it on, and that was the beginning of a long innings at Fab India, where I think I got to be part of the whole growth story. And I spent about 10 years growing from strength to strength. Was the architect of different kinds of formats of how a 400 square foot Fab India store would be different from a 2,000 square foot store, or 8,000 square feet store. And then of course we went on to open a flagship store in Mumbai, which was about 15,000 square feet. So what kind of category representation, what kind of width and depth of representations. I drove the P&L for about 125 stores. But there came a time where I realized that I was getting a bit bored of opening stores. I could open stores with my eyes shut. Clearly for me, the learning should never stop. And it was becoming evident to me that something was going to have to change, because it felt a bit like plodding in the sand. Just around then in 2008, there was an opportunity for us to move to Delhi, because my husband was moving jobs. And I got the opportunity to drive buying and merchandising at Fab India, which I welcomed and which I really took on. And I did that for about a year and a half. Launched jewelry as a category, which became a move the needle venture for Fab India over a period of time. But look, as things unfold, you realize that sometimes your aspirations and dreams become larger than the shoe that you're wearing. And there's nothing wrong with what it is that I was wanting to do. It's just that, organizationally, I think the priorities were different. And I realized that, if I had to take a leap of faith, I had to kind of go chart another, paint another canvas, move on to doing other things. And in January of 2010, I decided to stop working for other organizations. I decided to stop being a slave to an organization. By then I'd spent about 20 years in the workspace. So yeah, I mean, I think I had it in me to be able to really, run my own ship. I think I felt empowered in the true sense of the word when I was there, because it was I think I steered myself with a certain certainty that people would find very astounding. I felt it was my leap to consider and my leap to take, and if I was willing to take responsibility for outcomes, then there was really no problem. And I think I got a free hand when I was at Fab India to be able to do that, and set up over 100 stores, hand over contracts for 32 stores that would open over a period of time. It was incredible in terms of exposure and experience. So yeah, I mean, 2010, I charted off on started off on my own entrepreneurial journey. I set up a small consulting practice, but I very quickly realized that not working full time for an organization freed up so much of my time. I'd always been great traveler, and for me, my love for travel of a certain kind, of a certain nature, was something that had the making of a concept which I felt should be shared with the world, right? I mean, I like to get under the skin of a place, of get to know communities, people, basically look for the unknown in the known. We call journeys off the map, and I set up Breakaway in 2011. I was running a fashion and lifestyle advisory venture of my own and Breakaway when there was a chance encounter with somebody who introduced me to Puneet, who then ended up being my co-founder at Jaipur. And he was this young techie who felt that the future of the country is online, just didn't know what to sell. And there I was. I had some ideas on what I wanted to sell. I had these aspirations and dreams that I had for Fab India. But I was like, okay, let's give this 2 days a week of my time and see what we can build with it. And that's where my journey with Jaipur really started. We went on to launch the business in January of 2013, and I think just forged ahead based on the strength of a vision, which came from, I think, very deep convictions, which were the outcome of 12 years of being customer facing while at Fab India.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line, I think mustard happened. I mean, I didn't step out to look for an opportunity in the food space. Pretty much as just as the way I wasn't really looking to do Jaipur.com, but it was an opportunity that presented itself, and I'm a very stick your foot in the door kind of a person. So I felt there was an opportunity in there, and similarly, an opportunity presented itself to do something in the food space. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But yeah, I mean, a venture in food with my dear friend Poonam, saw the light of day in 2015, and that's what we continue to do till COVID struck. And then, of course, now is a different story altogether. But yeah, I mean, last year Jaipur got acquired and found a new home, and I've been able to since then devote my time to Breakaway and Mustard, and also go back to my first love, which is consulting. So yep.
Got it. No,
Yeah.
fantastic.
That's my
fantastic journey all the way from Fab India to Breakaway to Jaipur to Mustard. Fascinating. In all of this, I see, at least from outside, I see one commonality is that all of them have deep connection culturally to India. And we don't get to see speakers on this forum who have such diversity across all the four categories or three categories. And so I'm going to ask you this question, like, according to you, because each category defines the word culture and a cultural enterprise or a cultural entrepreneur in that lens of that category. You spanned across all these, three categories. So how do you define a cultural entrepreneur or a cultural enterprise?
So, I'm very inspired by the Japanese. I mean, look at how proud they are of their heritage and their culture. They wear their whole "Made in Japan," label tag with pride, with tremendous amount of pride. And I've always felt that, I think India has so much to offer. Our cultural heritage has so much to offer that really, I'm proud to be Indian. And if there is a way to be able to translate that into tangible product and tangible experiences, which really straddle, fashion and lifestyle and food and travel, then there are great opportunities. I mean, I think it comes from to be a cultural entrepreneur, pretty much means that you're driven by passion for travel, passion for food, passion for product and design, which all has a common thread, which is really that of a commitment to preserve your culture and your heritage. One example of a very, very fine cultural enterprise that I can think of, really, aside from what I've is really Amrapali jewelry, right? I mean, Amrapali silver jewels. It was a passion project of its founders, Rajiv Arora and Rajesh Ajmera. But look, I mean, it's the finest representation of traditional Indian jewelry and craftsmanship, which wears its Indian, badge with pride. Closer home, I mean, in Delhi, there is this a cultural haven called Bikaner House. I mean, these are all cultural enterprises, right? Which become a one-stop address for all things Indian, whether it's music in the arts, whether it's product, whether it's showcasing shows and performing arts, or fine product or experiences around food. These are all enterprises which are built on, I think, a very, very strong belief that we've got something to be proud of, and here's an opportunity for us to actually create a business proposition out of it.
But then the word culture has so many elements to it, right? So because how do you pinpoint the point that you want to accentuate as part of your brand proposition, and how do you pick the one that you want to bring out and say that this is what I stand for?
So look, I think the driving force over here really is vision for product experience, that you really, really want to give some manner of form, to be able to really create a business proposition out of it. Starts off as an experience, becomes a tangible product, which is unique, which is authentic, which is relatable, and which caters to a certain need. I mean, I always feel, passion by itself is overrated, unless you get really, really good at whatever it is that you're passionate about, right? Whether it is, to curate the finest experiences when it comes to travel around India, or whether it is to curate the finest experiences when it comes to regional cuisine. I mean, a lot of who we are today comes from the food we eat growing up. All of these, at the end of the day, have to be relatable and have to be. I think to be able to convert a concept, an idea, into a brand proposition really I think, has to be a very, very unique value proposition. I mean, I always tell people, create a need. Don't try and create a need that doesn't exist. There is a latent need. There are times that people appreciate things, people are ready to move on to something else, but are not necessarily able to articulate what it is that they're looking for. And to you as an entrepreneur, you have to be able to preempt your customer, your muse. You know, this is the person I want to cater to. This is a lifestyle, you know, that she upholds. These are her values. This is what she wears. This is where she eats. This is how she likes to travel. And it all, you know, kind of starts to um, um, fall into place as a tangible product or a tangible experience or a service. And that's really, you know, the starting point. And then it's, you know, lots of hard work and determination, fueled by a very, very strong approach to storytelling. I mean, the other day I was sitting in on the session with Hari Nair around tourism. And, you know, I totally resonate with what Hari said about the fact that, you know, storytelling is going to be key. You know, people really have to buy into a product or a service or a proposition. Then, you know, it's how you tell the story, how compelling a story you have, and how compelling a narrative you're going to be able to present in telling that story. So that's really what sets, you know, um, experiences and products apart.
Got it. And I saw that you are for Jaipur in your on your LinkedIn. You said you're the storyteller for Jaipur, right? So, what is Jaipur story, and how did you come up with it?
So, you know, I mean, I had spent about, you know, 15 years in the you know, fashion and lifestyle space, in the craft space. And it was, you know, having worked very closely with the customer, being customer, you know, facing, you know, having set up over 100 stores around the length and breadth of the country, it was evident that you know, the whole, let's say, the whole fashion ecosystem in India, you know, has 80% mass brands on the one end of the spectrum, and about 20% of, you know, what we call luxury designer brands at the other end of the spectrum, which also includes all these international brands which try and seduce, you know, the people with lots of money into buying, you know, big labels, big brands. And really, between these two ends of the spectrum, there's this large wide space which is open, right? I mean, Fab was at the top end of the 80%. And let's say a brand like Rohit Bal or, you know, Huda almost was at the other end of the spectrum. And there was this huge white space in between. That was one. And the other thing was that I felt from, you know, the years and being, you know, facing customer which is buying into the Fab India story, that at some point in time, as we move up the socioeconomic ladder, you know, we aspire to do better, we aspire to consume better, we aspire to travel better, we aspire to wear better clothes, nicer, you know, a more contemporary aesthetic. You know, the internet has been hugely instrumental in really impacting choices that, you know, people make. And the whole exposure to, you know, Western tastes, you know, contemporary fashion product, uh, there was clearly a gap that was waiting to be tapped into. And I never wanted to be an also ran. So for me, it was important to do something which would go beyond people were used to, what people had seen enough and more of, and yet at the same time create something which is a compelling case to make and which will endure over a period of time. It's not a fly by night proposition that's here today, gone tomorrow, which is riding current trends. It has to be classic, it has to be timeless, and it has to be an ambassador of Indian style. You know, I mean, if I had to, you know, summarize Jaipur in two words, I would say India modern, or I would say crafted in style. So it was really about taking craft and design, you know, the Indian approach to design and, you know, craft, a whole contemporary space which was relatable at a global level. Because the minute you decide to be an online only player, which is how we started in 2013, it was evident that we were going to be talking to audiences in other geographies as much. So it wasn't just India we were catering to. It was important for us to cater to customers in the US and in Australia and in England and, you know, Europe, with product that belonged in their homes as much, in their lifestyle as much as it did back home in India. And that was the opportunity. So yeah, I mean, it was just waiting to be done, I think. And, you know, we feel really good about the fact that we managed to, carve a niche for ourselves in that space.
Got it. I want to double click on that, especially because there are many entrepreneurs and businesses who are listening to you today who have a similar aspiration of going global. When you go global, I mean, particularly when you're selling a cultural product or an experience to Indian cultural product or an experience to an Indian audience, there is so much is already given because they already know about it, and there is a bit of context which is already assumed of your customer. But when you sell outside, it's very foreign to them, right? So they don't know what you are presenting. So you still need to preserve the uniqueness of your product, but at the same time make it relatable and familiar in their world. That's a hard ask, right? So do you have any tips and tricks to how to achieve that for an entrepreneur in any of these categories?
There are no tips and there are no tricks at all, Bala. I mean, there are no shortcuts. What I want to say is that, my advice to entrepreneurs when I'm talking to them always is that work very, very hard at your value proposition. Don't try and be an also ran. Don't try and look for elbow room in an already crowded elevator. Because the point is that if you're trying to do something that someone else already has done or somebody else is already doing, then your job is going to be that much harder, right? I mean, brands don't get built on the strength of cost leadership. And in any case, to be able to build businesses on the strength of cost leadership, you've got to have really, really deep pockets and lots and lots of very patient VC money. The truth is that if you have a very strong proposition, if you know what it is you stand for, you'll be able to any space. We didn't try to be a Fab India with Jaipur or, with Breakaway. I wasn't trying to do mainstream tourism because there were enough more players out there in the mainstream place. And I was not going to, be able to undercut somebody on, what we were offering. Because the whole point was not about, being cheaper and more cost effective. It was about being more experiential, more immersive, and not cookie cutter. Now, all of these things, I think, require a commitment and also require a long-standing vision, which allow you to focus on what it is that you're trying to build. I mean, when we went out to set up, let's say Mustard in Goa in 2015, Goa already had like 3,000 eateries. It didn't need yet another, Italian food place or yet another Goan food place. And the only way to do food in Goa and to get people to sit up and take notice was to bring in a cuisine that I had seen, but which at the same time would lend itself as much to tourists, from all over the country, all over the world, and still, hold, a promise, and then be able to be true to what it is we wanted to stand for, which was, and we did a concept which was, French and Bengali, meat over mustard as an ingredient. So there was two authentic cuisines, but very home style, very non-pretentious, honest food concepts, which Goa had not seen. And that in itself allowed people to sit up and take notice. So I think, I mean, I wouldn't call it a trick. But the truth is that unless your proposition, the value proposition, is very, very sharp and pointed, it's just going to be a very, very uphill task. That's not to say it's easy, right. But otherwise, it's just, somebody with deeper pockets who can shout louder than you can spend more money than you can, has been around longer than you have, will have you for breakfast before you've even woken up. So, that's pointless.
So does your authenticity and true to your vision and honest, do they provide that defense against somebody with big pockets and mass market?
I wouldn't say defense, but you do have a moat around your business, right? I mean, the point is that somebody else didn't think about it. You thought about it, and therefore you have a first mover advantage. See, the truth also is, I've learned in the last 10 years of being an entrepreneur that sometimes we're so emotionally attached to our ideas that we think we're the only ones who are thinking about it. The truth is that there's loads of people out there who've thought about it and either failed miserably or succeeded. So, now in hindsight, everything looks like wisdom. But the truth is that, we have to go out and find all those people who ventured into that space, and either, did a great job, or failed miserably. You have to talk to both these people to be able to understand and learn from their experiences. And I think the advantage that entrepreneurs today have, and this bunch of entrepreneurs who've signed up with this program, their biggest advantage is that the ecosystem is so willing to talk, is so enabling and willing to share a lot more than it was, let's say, 10 years ago.
Mm.
And I think that their biggest advantage, I mean, your biggest advantage, as a group, as a cohort who's listening in, is really that you have the benefit of learning from other people's experiences. And there is so much to learn.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's it all helps tremendously in
Got
helping
it.
you fine tune your proposition. And I mean, I feel that analyzing your competitive space to death really is a great starting point to figure out where there might be a gap that you can plug.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
You mentioned about these things like, relatability and authenticity and honest, and
Yeah.
you said that could become your mode. Could you give us some advice or some framework around how to communicate those? Because these are very soft, you kind of feel it, but it's not tangible, something that you cannot like write on the wall and say, I've done it, right? So how do you communicate it to your customer and make it part of your value proposition?
So, I'll use mustard as an example, right? Mustard is, French meets Bengali over mustard as an ingredient. And for us, the fact that we were doing regional Indian cuisine in a way that had never been done before. I mean, let's just take a step back and look at the F&B landscape in the country, right? For the longest time, Indian food was synonymous with Punjabi or North Indian food,
Right.
right? And the only other regional cuisine was really what we call Indian, or the food that people were exposed to at restaurants and cafes and Udupis, and then the slightly more fancy ones like Krishna and Mahesh Lunch Home and so on over a period of time. And the European and Mediterranean, which was all lumped together as what we call continental food, right? You went out for a continental meal. This is how the F&B landscape was. But the truth is that through, let's say, my travels, my experiences in the travel space, it was fairly evident that every state, every culture has so much to offer by way of its food, and even within a state, food is so experiences around food are so nuanced that what you get from East Bengal is very different from what West Bengal has to offer, and as you go to Bangladesh, it's a whole new perspective on Bengal. We felt that if we had to bring in relatable and what I call non-pretentious and honest food, Bengali food, then we had to really fish out stories around every single dish that made it to our menu. And if you went to our website, now the restaurants are currently shut, but if you went to the website or to our social media, you would see every single dish on the menu as a story. So, to answer your question, how do we communicate these stories? We tell stories in every piece of communication, whether it's our menus, whether it's our social media platforms, whether it is our signage, whether it is the lab on, everything that we do. Like, for example, whilst Bengali was the only cuisine that the restaurant stood for, we curated experiences at, festivals around different cuisines, whether it was Kashmiri or whether it was, a food festival around Ponga, around Onam, or let's say, temple foods from Tamil Nadu around Pongal, and Assamese food around Bihu. So the thing is, it becomes not a brand identity, I mean, everything that we did, everything that we said, was an extension of a commitment that we'd made to being the voice of regional Indian food in the country.
Mm.
So yeah, and then that becomes synonymous with you as a brand. I mean, people look to you as an experience. They don't just look to you as a place they can come to for a Bengali meal or a French meal, but as a place to come experience regional Indian food in a way that no one ever does before, has done in the past.
Got it. Got it. I think I really like your example of how you should connect every product and every menu item to a story. And that really helps you reinforce that vision and what you stand for with your customer. I think that's a fantastic idea. But while you were telling this, it struck me. If, for example, you said entrepreneurs need to have a strong vision. They have to refine their value proposition. They have to stick to their, craft their story very well and explain this. This is all like what an entrepreneur can do by herself. Now the question is, how does she know that it's connecting with the audience? How does she know whether audience tastes are in line with what her vision is, right? So how do we do that? Because it's their vision and they feel strongly about it. So obviously, if I'm a hammer, I'll only see nails all around me. But how do you know that you are you are fitting into your customers' life and fitting into their meaning, right? So what are some ways to know that?
Sure. So, I started off by saying that, in doing whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's a passion project or whether it is a very clear business opportunity, do not try and cater to needs that don't exist. Let there be an evinced need. Let there be enough of an understanding of your customer to know that this is something that will appeal to this customer, or this customer will be ready to take this leap of faith when it comes to this approach to, let's say, styling clothes, or this approach to creating jewelry designs. Your job is that much easier if you have a deep understanding of what your customer will need. And I think no fine-tuning of value proposition is possible without really doing a deep dive into the mind of your customer. And this does not require expensive diagnostics to be done. I mean, this is conversations with 20 people across the country. For the last 20 years, I think I have not been able to commission formal qualitative or quantitative research. I mean, A, there is experience, B, there is an understanding of the customer, and C, there is a very strong inner compass, which tells you this is what this customer wants, this is what this customer craves. And this is the outcome of those many interactions with our audience. It's not stemming from somebody's hat. It's from being customer facing, in shops, whether it was, Fabulous stores in the north or in down south or in the east or in Bombay. And, people in different geographies and different cultures are wired very differently. There is no one mindset. I mean, today I live in Delhi, but that does not mean that my worldview on what the customer wants is only going to be a function of what a typical urban woman, professional woman with, refined taste and aesthetic, so on and so forth, is going to be in Delhi. No, I have to look for a similar demographic in Bombay and Bangalore and Chennai and Calcutta and talk to each one of these and then look for a common thread that runs across all. So like I said, Bala, there are no shortcuts. There is no cheap and cheerful way of doing it. I mean, I've had that term thrown at me in the face many times. Isn't there a cheaper, cheerful way to do this? I'm saying there's no cheap and cheerful way, but yeah, you don't have to commission expensive diagnostic studies with, professional agencies. I'm not dismissing them, but I do understand that bootstrapped entrepreneurs, all of us who are nurturing, 5 ideas in our heads today don't have the, bandwidth to spend on commissioned research.
Right.
But nothing stops us. And survey monkeys today, I think are very, very effective. There is so much you can do just to get 3 questions answered. I mean, I could talk to 20 customers in a day,
Right,
very easily.
Yeah. Jaipur is
that's a starting point.
Got it. Jaipur is a completely online platform, whereas the other your Mustard is an offline endeavor. How much of digital kind of marketing platforms did you leverage, and how did you leverage digital also to understand your customer and kind of do a bit of connect with them and understand whether the value proposition is is sticking or not?
So I'll let me start off by saying that Jaipur is not just online. I mean, in 2018, Jaipur went ahead and set up 2 stores, one in Delhi and one in Bangalore, because it was evident at that point in time that to be able to nudge the audience, which is ripe for Jaipur kind of product, into, to nudge this woman to shopping online, we would need to give her a tactical experience of what it is that Jaipur stood for. I'd like to put in a caveat here. I mean, the business got acquired by Aditya Birla last year, so I'm not here as a spokesperson for the brand and its priorities today. I'm only talking to you about what my vision for the business was way back then when I first started. All right. So in no way is this to be treated as, word on their approach and their strategy for the business. But way back then, it was evident to me that we would need to have an offline experience which would gently nudge the woman who had been looking at Jaipur online on social media, and on the website, but not really wanted to buy because of not really taking the leap of faith, because she's used to a tactile experience. She's used to this whole business of trying things out. So the offline stores were launched, and over a period of time, the idea was to do multiple stores around the country, which would then become enablers to online shopping, because really, I mean, infinite aisles and the largest variety of product is sitting online, not in a finite space. The finite space allows you to create tangible experiences. To answer your question specifically, I mean, digital is, you can't run businesses, you can't build businesses without having a very, very strong digital footprint today. Whether it's Facebook or Instagram. I mean, look at what the internet has been able to do, and more so in the times of COVID. I mean, Abraham Lincoln is known to have said that sometimes decades go by and nothing happens, and then decades happen in 8 weeks. That's what's happened to us, right, during COVID. So digital has really, really changed the way people product, changed the way people experience product. And I think that's where the role of storytelling comes in, right? How do you make a compelling case? At Jaipur, for example, we had a very, very, and all our marketing money was spent, digitally on Facebook and Google. And on Facebook and Instagram was early days then. But, I mean, 4 out of 5 of our posts every day were engagement posts which didn't talk about product, which were connecting with the audience at different levels. Having conversations with them about other things that were important to them, priorities, whether we're talking about gender, whether we're talking about nostalgia, whether we're talking about heirloom, hand-me-downs from my mother. It wasn't about product, because product was an outcome of the stories we wanted to tell. We were talking about, we were sharing stories of producer groups, of artisans. We were curating experiences wherein, all the beautiful product that you saw on the website, you had an opportunity to actually go travel to those clusters, whether it was Kutch or Kashmir or Tamil Nadu or Bengal. You could travel to those villages and engage with, the artisans. Now that all, I think, was a very, very strong narrative, which allowed for us to build a following, to build trust, which then, gave women, made them take the leap of faith where they could spend 65,000 rupees on a silver cuff or 1,40,000 on a pashmina shawl. That's how you build trust. That's how you build a brand. And, it became much bigger than the business. So it's all about, how you tell your story, because digital is the only opportunity you have.
Sorry. So you brought up the importance of how you can use an online space and how you can craft offline experiences. And these are not like a this or that, but more like you need both. If you were to start a cultural, new one entrepreneurship or a new initiative today, would you start offline and then go online, or would you start online and go offline? How would you sequence it? How do you see that?
It's a bit hard to answer that question because it all depends on the category. I mean, let me let me use F&B as an example. Would I start online? Would I set up a business doing deliveries and then go offline? No, I wouldn't.
Mm.
You know, I wouldn't. Okay, let me say, I'm speaking for myself here. There is no right or wrong about these things. But
Right. Right.
to me, building a brand and telling your story is important. Creating and curating an experience is important to be able to tell your story and make a compelling case for what it is that you're trying to build. And online can only be an outcome of what you've built offline. That's
Mm.
F&B. Travel is a different space altogether. Right? You don't need, but to say that in this day and age when travel has come to a grinding halt, there is a lot of conversation around virtual travel. Now, I'm a purist. I'm also traditional, maybe old-fashioned. To me, there's no such thing as virtual travel,
Mm.
right? I mean, how do you have an immersive experience virtually? It's
Yeah.
So I've said no, thank you very much, but we should not be offering any virtual tours. We will wait till it's time to feel the space, the people, the community, the interactions, um, out there yourself. With product, look, with product, I mean, people are continuing to launch businesses in the online space. So it's doable. Again, if you have a very compelling proposition, if you have a product which is bang on in terms of what people need today. Like the other day, there was a big conversation around 5 ml sachets, 8 ml sachets of hand sanitizers. How come nobody's ever done it before? Indigo Airlines is now giving out these sachets on. Look, the truth is that if you've got a product which is the need of the hour, you
Yeah.
don't really need to have an offline presence. You can totally promote it digitally and find takers for it. So it's all about what your product is, what your service is, and what your promise is going to be.
Got it.
So there's no one answer to that question. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. At least you've given us a way of thinking about it. What, in your experience across all these sectors, which has been hard to as a medium to convey the storytelling part, online or offline?
I mean, look, the thing is, nothing is easy. All of them have had their challenges.
Right.
Telling a story online requires very deep pockets. Customer acquisition online is a very, very expensive proposition.
Right.
Conversion rates online are much harder than conversion rates offline. I mean, typically in a retail environment, in a lifestyle store, you can have a 50% conversion rate, at least 50% conversion rate. If people walk into your store, they'll walk out with something. They might buy a bar of soap or maybe just a bottle of honey. At Fabindia, I think way back then, 10 years ago, when I was still, associated with the business, I think we had conversion rates of upwards of 90%. 9 out of 10 people, walked out with something.
Okay.
Shop, right? I have no idea what the metrics are now. In the online space, it's single digit numbers. I mean, I read somewhere, and please don't hang me for this, but I read somewhere that even Amazon in India, pre-COVID, had a conversion rate of like 6 to 7%.
Yeah.
6 to 7 of the 100 people who went to Amazon actually shopped.
Got it.
That should answer your question.
Yeah, no, and you are right. I mean, that's one of the reasons I was posing that question. Online gets to be more transactional, isn't it? Like, when you are coming there to a store, you're kind of more transactional. But at the same time, online is a richer medium from a digital perspective. So it's kind of hard to tell between, which is how do you use these two mediums for storytelling?
Yeah, look, yeah.
So product perspective.
Sorry. So the thing is that I think the two work hand in hand. There is no either or. My advice to anybody who came to me to say, "Oh, I'm going to set up my own website," was that actually the likes of Shopify today make entry barriers into e-commerce non-existent. But what people need to understand is that it's not just about setting up a good-looking e-commerce platform. It's about finding ways to draw traffic, and not just draw traffic, but also get them to transact. out of 100, if there are 20 people who come to the website, you're lucky if, one person transacts.
Right.
So the truth is, you need deep pockets. You need technology. You need an interface which is able to, help you discover all that is sitting on the website.
Mhm.
I mean, offline spaces have finite aisles. Online spaces have infinite aisles. The variety that one can showcase on an e-commerce website is far in excess of what you'd be able to showcase even in a 15,000 square foot store, right?
Right.
There's no comparison.
Right.
But the truth is that um, that leap of faith needs to be made in your head. And then, of course, the biggest barrier to shopping for apparel online is this whole business of sizing. And we have no standardization of sizes between brands in the country. The Indian body type is not a classical size 8, 8, 10, 12, 14. So there's loads of complexities, which then impact buying behavior.
Mm.
So I think, at the end of the day, what people really need to look for is a combination of an online and offline presence. And it doesn't mean you have to invest in your own stores, because the economics of offline retail are staggering. It's not anybody's cup of tea, right? But the truth is that the lines between conventional retail and lifestyle spaces are blurring. And it's very interesting to see, how there is a merging of concepts. Restaurants are now becoming, retail spots for food and cookware and, interesting ceramic and so on and so forth. There are enough and more examples of cafes. Way back in 2005, I think, at Fab India, we did Moshe's as a cafe upstairs in the Fab India store at Kalakoda, the flagship store. And the whole idea was to get people, to encourage people to eat, stop by and grab a bite at the cafe in the midst of their shopping, and make a whole experience out of it, so that the whole family experience stayed with them much longer than the time they spent buying that one white kurta. And there's so much more of that happening today. So it doesn't really mean that, if you have to have an offline presence, you have to have a store of your own.
Got it.
Today you can have in a multi brand outlet, you can have very interesting, product placements in restaurants and cafes. The sky is the limit in terms of possibilities that exist.
Very nice. Very interesting story about the cafe adding to the experience of Fab India in there. And I'm a big fan of Fab India, and I have to tell you, every time I go there, I spend time in the cafes while my wife was shopping. So it also helped to kind of go as a family together, and it was a very calming place as well.
Yeah.
So I have one more question, Shilpa, but before we go into that question, it's slightly different aspects of our conversation. There are a bunch of questions from the audience that I want to take, and then we'll probably wrap it up with my final question. By the way, before we go on, I think you have a fan club. Roli Mishra says, very inspirational to hear you. Bhavna says she's a big fan and a patron of Jaipur. So it's lovely to hear you. So just starting off with that, Bhavna has a question, is there merit in joining forces with other entrepreneurs in the same sector, or does it dilute one's authenticity?
I'm a big believer in the strength of collaborations. I think that 1 and 1 makes 11, and there is total merit in joining hands with people. There's really no such thing as competition. You find ways and means to work together and just come across as a far more forceful proposition if you choose to collaborate. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, right? It can be even for both. There are enough and more examples of collaborations. I think, again, Jaipur as a brand, Mustard as a brand, Breakaway as a brand. All three of our businesses, my businesses, have actually been built on this collaborations. Because for anybody to set out to do everything on their own is a very lift. Not to mention the amount of time and resources it would require. We could never curate menus for different regional cuisines on our own. You collaborate with, home chefs who have a reputation in that space. You don't say, oh, this one is competition. We've invited chefs from outside to come post-festival that mastered. At Breakaway, we curate experiences, we curate walks. And, if we go to Chennai, I'm not going to try and curate a walk, in the Malapur, market on my own. I'm going to work with Story Trails because they do a damn good job of, tramping around Chennai as a city, or, Rubaru in Banaras, for example, because, the collaborations are really the only way to grow, I think.
Got it.
I'm very grateful for this having come up because on my own, I wouldn't have brought it up, and
Got it.
I would have felt really bad about that because that's a big lesson
No, it's
for
fantastic.
everybody.
Yeah. So another question by Ritu Mathur is that she said, how do you brand differently, from existing brands? And she gave an example. She said, you were working in Fab India. Her comment is your initial e-commerce was very similar to Fab India style. So how did you shift that, and how did the new brand, got established as compared to, the previous experience at Fab India?
When you say new brand, you mean Jaipur?
Jaipur, that's correct. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should
So
have mentioned.
Jaipur was never ever a Me Too to Fab India. I remember when we first launched Jaipur, we were only selling the most exquisite product, which you could only get, one-offs of. I mean, it was the kind of stuff that people couldn't even make 5 pieces of.
Got it.
Because that was really a pitch to I think a connoisseur of, design, craft, and craftsmanship and high quality. So I don't really know, what is it that leads Ritu to believe that, Jaipur set out something like a Fab India, because I think the brand wouldn't have gotten anywhere by being a Me Too to what Fab India was. The whole idea was to go beyond, the lines that Fab India had drawn for itself in terms of approach to color, approach to design, approach to form. I guess as an organization, there was shareholder interest to protect. There was a whole focus on geographical footprint of 300 stores. So that meant that unless you could produce 500 pieces of everything that you did, it was not product you could feature. And our whole point at Jaipur was that you don't really need to be able to multiply stuff. If you have only 2 of these, that's okay. We'll pitch them as, limited edition, unique proposition. So,
Right.
I mean, there was no ambiguity in my mind about what it is that we would be and what it is that we would not be. So, because like I said, I mean, for me, it was always about pushing boundaries and taking a leap of faith and standing up for something that you know and you believe in. Trying to be a Me Too is none of that.
Got it. Another question related to Jaipur was from Shweta. Her question is, how did you convince your first set of designers to showcase their collections on Jaipur, particularly when audience wasn't so much at the beginning?
I think everyone who welcomed us, there were 5 who slammed the door shut on our face. So I think we just persisted. We knew what we were trying to build. All I had was 5-slide spiral bound folder, which was a dream that I went to people with. And I have to say that some people had known of my work in India and had seen what I'd been able to build. And I think a lot of them took a leap of faith and said, okay, you know what, we'll come along and see where you can take this. And there were others who said, okay, you know what, I knew you as Fab India and now you're not Fab India anymore. So, go build whatever it is that you're trying to build and then we'll see. So yeah, it was a mixed bag. And, I think there is huge amount of humility in being an entrepreneur, because suddenly you realize that, the tag I had associated with my name, attached to my name, no longer exists. So now I really have to, be able to make a compelling case for what I want to build.
Interesting.
So it happens. Yeah.
And how long, once you started your Jaipur journey, how long did it take to start getting, good business? What is the incubation period?
I mean, what is good business? I think when we started in 2013, we would put up 10 things every day, Monday to Friday, only 10 products every day, Monday to Friday, and then spend Sunday promoting them on Facebook and hoping somebody would buy, But look, the thing is that, as word travels, as, social media tends to go viral.
Mm.
And I think word traveled, people talked about us amongst each other. They spoke to their friends and family overseas and so on and so forth. And I think by the end of year one, we were already at a run rate of 1 crore a month.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. And how do you, what are some of the advice that you could give to entrepreneurs who struggle when they get kind of boxed into a small niche of customers and but they want to expand the market size? How should they look at it in terms of expanding the reach and the market size?
The thing is that, I mean, I've talked enough about the fact that you need to have a very, very strong proposition,
Right. Right.
right? The other thing is that as entrepreneurs, we're so wedded to our own ideas, and so emotionally attached to our own ideas that
Mm.
we tend to get very fixed and rigid. And
Mm.
I've learned lessons the hard way, where it's important to be agile. It's important to be flexible. It's important to be able to do things differently if that's what it's going to take. So, I mean, you need to be able to do things you want to do. So, to give you an example, I mean, at Breakaway, I was creating experiences called Beyond Share Experiences of India.
Shilpa, we kind of lost you for a few seconds there. Shilpa, we lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm saying at Breakaway, we're curating what we call the space. We did not want to collaborate with anybody unless they introduced us as their experiential partner.
I see.
The truth is that I learned the hard way that it was okay to white label your product.
Mm.
Just because a large player XYZ wanted to be able to present your work, your experiences as their own. Truth is that that paid some bills and allowed us to curate experiences which would then go as under our own label. And I mean, I've become a big crusader for white labeling product for B2B, because look, I mean, B2B allows you to do things, to take the leap of faith that you want to in your B2C interactions.
Mm.
So I mean, that's one piece of advice, right? Be agile, be flexible, be willing to white label your product if that's going to help pay some bills and give you economies of scale and efficiencies in terms of being able to amortize your capacities and so on and so forth, whether it's product or whether it's a service that you're selling.
Sure.
And the other thing also is that don't give up. I mean, I think perseverance is the name of the game when it comes to entrepreneurship. There is a reason why people say it's a very lonely journey. There's a reason why people say that you've got to really, really be bold about who you are. The paths to what people think is an exit, or the paths to fame, or the paths to success is ridden with, very, very difficult, terrain to be navigated.
Sure.
And I think if you believe in whatever it is that you're trying to build, then you have to stand true to it. The other thing is that, just make sure that your unit economics is in place. Because if you do not have a positive, a healthy gross margin, then no amount of VC money is really going to help you, save the business. And it's really, really going to go down the tube. And one of the things that people lose sight of really is this whole.
Looks like we've lost Shilpa due to poor connection. She will just join. Yeah, Shilpa, you're there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So unit is extremely important. So just make sure that you're not losing sight of that.
Got it.
Yeah.
There are a few more questions, which what we will do is we will get your response offline. We are just running just a bit of at the top of the hour. But I wanted to get to the final question that I had that I wanted to ask you. And what does it mean to be a woman entrepreneur? You are a serial entrepreneur. You are you've juggled a lot of things. Are there any unique perspectives of that you can share with the audience? By the way, another reason I wanted to ask this question is more than 50% of the audience for NICE are actually women. So I think it would be great to hear from you as they go along on their own journey.
I'm not surprised about that at all, because I think that women are far more sincere and far more honest in admitting that there is something that they don't know and are willing to learn. Women bring a certain level of compassion and empathy and sensitivity to their work. So, as a woman entrepreneur, I think, it's a tough journey. It's a tough road. I've been there. As mothers, as caregivers for our parents, our in-laws, as in our relationships with our partners, we want to be able to juggle multiple balls and not drop the ball on anything. Keep many balls spinning without dropping any of them, and that takes a lot.
Mm.
So I'm saying, my advice to women really is, find yourself a mentor. Find somebody who will be able to share a perspective when you're in a situation that you find yourself, stuck in. When you feel that you need someone to lean on, I think that's very, very important. Be bold about who you are. Negotiate carefully. Negotiate your space at home, with your children, with your husbands, with your parents, with your partners. Very important. Choose your partners very, very carefully. I mean, I think especially, I've been in, I've had a male co-founder, I've had a female co-founder. I think, women co-founders are very secure. It takes a very, very secure man, to be threatened, strong. So, if you're going to have a male co-founder, then you've got to choose very, very carefully. If you've got a female co-founder, then, there is some dynamics that you would have to deal with, but it's much easier because, like I said, women are far more honest and, sincere about, what they can do and what they can't do. And, learn to ask. I mean, one of my biggest lessons has been, in my journey has been learning to ask. And then you realize it's so easy because all you needed to do was ask. How hard is that? It is very, very hard. I mean, I know how hard it was for me to begin to ask for help, ask for support. Don't just assume it will come to you because, your work should speak for itself. No, it's a very ruthless world. It's a very, very competitive space. So learn to ask, expect anything worthwhile to take time. There are no shortcuts. There's lots of hard work. I mean, I meet women all the time who say, I'm passionate about this. I'm thinking of making a business out of it. Passion is very overrated because you're passionate about something today. And unless you get really, really good at it, you might lose interest in it tomorrow and then be passionate about something else. Where does that leave you? So passion has to be accompanied by a determination to get really good at it. What else? I mean, I think needless to say that, women have to look for safe spaces where they can share, where they can talk, not get bogged down by gender disparity. I mean, it's a reality that we have to live with. But the truth is that, you find a way to create an opportunity out of a situation. I mean, never let that come in the way. Yeah. Sure. I mean, the biggest thing is the overarching advice to women is to really negotiate their space.
Very, very interesting. Very insightful. Shilpa, thank you very much. I've jotted down some points just to recap for myself as well as for the audience. I'm just going to say, number one, I saw you echo many times over, is to start with a strong vision, refine it, but stick to it. I think that's your core, and that's where everything flows out of. And second is, be unique, be authentic, be relatable, always keep refining, talking to your customers, and then so you can fine tune that. Be honest to your, to what you do. Analyze competition. I think you've said you've learned a lot from analyzing competition. Don't reinvent the wheel there. And then a few very interesting tidbits that you mentioned is connect stories to your product or your experience. You always connect a story to it. And so every product needs to tell a story. I think that's how you said you stitch the storytelling aspect of it. And then you said product is an outcome of the stories you tell. So actually you should start with the story and the product is the result of it. I really loved how you framed it, because a lot of us struggle with the storytelling part. And so what you said was very interesting there. And you said be open to partnership, be flexible, a white label if you want, and then kind of expand the reach there. And particularly for being a woman entrepreneur, which by the way, I think it is not just women. What you talked about women, I felt that even men should follow this. Is that find a mentor? It's a very lonesome journey, grueling journey. You need to be very persistent. So finding a mentor is very important, and negotiating your space, like you said it beautifully. I think that's very important. Learning to ask is very important as well. And like you rightly said, I also believe that passion is overrated. You commit to something and be good at it, or get, at least keep on improving at 1% a day, and things will happen. So Shilpa, wonderful.
One more point on
Yes.
Collaboration, on having a collaborative mindset.
Collaborative mindset. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks for that. Wonderful session, Shilpa. We really learned a lot from your diverse and rich experience. And you've kind of really peeled a lot of complexity in terms of how to think about the journey, entrepreneurial journey, particularly in the cultural space to us. Thank you very much. There have been many more questions. What we will do is we will take it offline. We will have you answer that and then respond to them on our social media channels, so people can read it later as well. But thanks for joining today on a weekend. And audience, I hope you enjoyed this session. I'll see you in the next episode of Arohana.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure entirely, and all the very best to this cohort. You've got a very, very interesting lineup of speakers, and I look forward to participating in some of these. So yeah, I'll be a quiet listener on some of these. I mean, the one thing that I've also learned is that you have to be a lifelong student.
Right.
May the learning never stop for all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpa. And folks, next session, thanks Arvind for sharing that. Next session is on 2nd December, 4 p.m. I'll see you here. It's a health and wellness and beauty segment on emerging trends in that segment. And it's by Manoj Kumar, who's an ex-MD of GSK Consumer Healthcare. And is actually along with Shilpa, he's your
partner at the consulting firm, Valmore. Yes.
As well as in the CCBP program.
Yes.
So we have your colleague there. So next session at 4 p.m. on 2nd December. So please register as well as join for this session. And until then, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.